Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope you're doing fantastic. We're continuing today our reading of a very woke book, probably one of the most woke we can get our hands on. I had to go searching on a journey for it, and it has proven to be quite insane. And so let us continue upon that path, dissect it, give them a fair shake, because we cannot criticize something that we haven't tried to understand. So what we're trying to do here is to see their perspective, argue against it, and encourage people to kind of see the other side, the other perspective of what this author is pushing. So if her audience sees it, maybe they'll learn our side, and our side can hear her view and then formulate arguments against it effectively. That's my goal. Let's begin. A vengeful entitlement to the bodies and affection of women and girls is a common chorus in the new far right song sheet. So here, mentioning the far right, she puts Christian men on the far right, but doesn't put Muslim men or Jews, if you recall. Very bizarre. Because what she doesn't like about straight Christian white men could be applied to a white heterosexual Muslim man. But to these type of woke liberals, they see kind of Muslims as a piece on the chessboard. It's an explicitly violent sexual paradigm, but it refuses to understand itself as sexually violent. Instead, sexual violence is reimagined as an outside threat, not something that white men do, but something that foreign or immigrant men do to our women, who must be protected, not because they are our people, but because they are property. Now, this is even this is cynical right here. Okay, so she contends that white men who are Christian only care about their women not being R-worded. Okay, how do I put it in a very simplistic way? She feels if it was their own men doing the R-ing, we'll say it that way, it would be not as egregious as an immigrant doing it, because the women are considered property. See what I'm saying? Which is bizarre. It's bizarre. Now, it doesn't matter if an immigrant or a citizen is the one to R a woman. It's wrong regardless. And to say that gay men are not capable of R-ing other gay men is false, because bisexual men in prison do that a lot. They do that a lot. And that was part of the reason why some of those transgenders who've had surgery to look like a woman, they're afraid to go with men because they're afraid to be R-worded. And they're afraid by any color. And they themselves are citizens of America. And some of the men who would R them are atheists or pagans or polytheists, whomever, right? And so R-wording happens to men all the time in prison by other gay men, right? And by bisexual men. I mean, prison is a very dangerous place for the rear end of any man who goes in there. And women in the female section, a lot of them are bullied and coerced by lesbians to perform sexual acts. So I don't see why she doesn't bring that up. And so it's quite sick for her to assume that white men only care about the R word if an immigrant does it, but won't feel the need to protect their women when it's theirs. And that if they're mad at an immigrant man for wanting to R-word their woman, it's only because they see those women as their property and not as human beings. This is quite cynical. Quite cynical. I mean, I hope you've noticed just so far in these pages how viciously she really hates white Christian straight men. It's quite frightening. You know, I hope she makes Well, in Islam, you're not allowed to have a male friend. It'd be haram. But I just hope that some guy maybe becomes a kind person to her. Maybe an old Christian guy fixes her truck for her or something when she needs it, or I don't know, does some act of kindness to where she reforms herself. Because her deep-seated hatred towards pale people is becoming quite strange, you know? Quite strange. That's why it's a mistake to talk about modern misogyny without talking about race and racism. So we have modern misogyny and racism. The two are not structurally the same, but they cannot be separated either. This is, in part, what theorist Kimberly Crenshaw meant when she coined the term intersectionality. Okay, so what's weird here, I would ask her if I knew her, okay, you care about misogyny, you care about racism. Do you care about when white people are attacked? Do you care when members of the same ethnic group assault their own women with the R word, right? Do you deny that, let's say, I know, no offense to the people in India, but we get stories of constant, I've seen horrible videos of women just being pawed at in the street. And that can happen anywhere. I mean, I pay attention to a lot of international journalists, a lot of true crime stories. If you look at my crime playlist, you'll see that I cover a lot of different crimes across the world, and I follow them, see what's going on. And the R word happens in any community, regardless of it having racism in it or not. And the R word is bad regardless of the race of the person who does it, right? And so I hope that one day she can not think that men only commit the R word if they're racist. If they commit the R word, it doesn't have to do with race. It has to do with them being a deviant person who serves shaitan. Someone who's just inherently evil. And it doesn't matter the color of their skin or the color of the women they attack. It's the action. It's like when you, it's how do I put it? It's sort of superficial in my opinion. It's like the different feathers of a bird. You got a green bird attacks the black bird. It doesn't matter the feather color. What matters is the action, right? It doesn't matter the breed of the chicken, right? If it's a Cornish hen and the other one is a different breed, they're the same species but different bloodlines of chicken. The action is the same, right? So that's how I look at the R word. Is that it's not necessarily about race and immigration status, but about the morals of the people coming. And with the immigrant status stuff, I believe is people just wanting background checks and vetting, right? If you have a lot of domestic criminals, the last thing you want is importing criminals. So when you go through the visa program, they hope it's a vetting system to only let the cream of the crop in, right? Because only a fool would willingly let in criminals. You want people to have a vetting process. And you don't want the cultures to be too different to where, there's a problem. Like, what's interesting is the example of the Native American Indians who, they had their tribes. They warred with the colonists, right? The pilgrims, whatnot. They were told, get along, accept. The whites wiped them out through war and through breeding with the other. I'm part Cherokee, with breeding, intermarriage and stuff. And now you see who won the demographics, right? The immigrants who came over from England and the Danish and the French and whatever, they were the immigrants, and the people told the Indians don't discriminate against them. What happened? They got erased. There was a war. America has always had a very unique relationship with Mexico, especially since some states used to belong to Mexico. And the southern part of America, I mean, we have to look back and see the beauty of how so many Western movies feature both Native American Indians and Mexicans specifically, right? Tijuana. I mean, you see so much of the Mexican culture on the border towns of America, and it's almost like now Spanish is the second language of America. I don't think you can go to any state in America and not see a Latino. And so you also see within these pocket communities, I'll hear Mexicans talk trash about Guatemalans, and I'll hear Guatemalans say slurs towards Mexicans. To us outsiders, you see them the same, but to them, they're different. And they see themselves as a very unique heritage. And so I found that to be also unique. It's not just one homogenous pot that always votes the same. So when she focuses on white men, it's like Bulgarians, you're looking at the Frenchmen, you're looking at the Italians, you're looking at the Germans and the Polish, even Brazilians. Some of them are black and some of them are white. Most of the Brazilians who live around here, they look white to me. And the only way I know they're Brazilian is because they speak Brazilian, and I ask them, are you from Brazil? They're like, yeah, I'm from Brazil, right? So also in the Cuban community, some of them are black, brown, and some of them are very light-skinned with blue eyes even. And you're like, wow. So white, describing the shade pigmentation, it's too broad of a term. You're going with the Russians and Ukrainians. You know, I mean, a Jamaican is different than someone from Kenya. Just because they share the same skin shade doesn't mean the cultures and the values are the same. So her obsession with pinning all the problems on white Christian men who are heterosexual and want monogamous marriages and who want the restoration of the role of fathers is quite telling of where she's at and what a college education can do to some people. Different forms of oppression overlap and intersect, yes, and cannot be properly understood on their own. Well, yeah, they can, but you can look at them as themselves and as they overlap, I'd argue. White supremacy as a political system is deeply gendered. It relies on a specific ideology of white male power that entitles white men to the control of all women's bodies. So here you're getting at the abortion and modesty laws. So this is where I would come at her. I'd say historically, when the Jewish community and the Muslims and the Christians, when they were very strict back in the day with their women, they wanted modesty. They didn't celebrate abortion. It was a tragedy to have a miscarriage. They were excited about marriages and weddings were celebrated. They didn't want their chick to be known as a woman of the night. A woman of the night is quite different than a woman who's had, 2 failed relationships or 5 failed relationships and she just really is getting the shoe of it all. That's quite different than a woman who's had failed relationships versus a woman who actually sells her body. Quite different, right? And so it's not just about white men. There are faiths that are placing men in charge of helping women to be safe, to not become Ishtars. If you read the Epic of Gilgamesh, you'll see the inverted female energy. There's tons of examples in real life with, biographies of females in prison who made a muck of themselves, to mythological ones, where they're a mythological story of legends and all that, folk tales, to remind people of what happens when certain women use their sexuality as a weapon to control the minds of men. And how a man who allows himself to be controlled by a woman's sexuality would never make a good husband or father, a good leader, right? Because the ghastly energy of that demonic lust isn't pure. And a man who is obsessed with pornography and such is also not a good ruler, right? I mean, just today I shared on my community tab a guy who executed his entire family because they wouldn't give him any more money to pay a cam girl. He became obsessed with her. He was a porn addict. He even went to rehab and failed. And so, when you're trying to tell your young daughters, you don't want to sell yourself, your body in such a way, and you shouldn't take joy at executing the adorable babies in your womb. That's a good thing because there's a lot of mental scars that come with abortion, right? My mom had 6 abortions. She sometimes, when she's feeling talkative, will say it does haunt her. So, I would argue that good fathers, good brothers, they don't want you to fall into that mud hole, right? And it's fascinating just how she thinks that only white men want to help guide women to not using their bodies in negative ways. I think that's the benefit of traveling or studying other cultures. Even though I'm Muslim and I would study what Islam says, if you go about, you start to notice that for hundreds upon hundreds of years, there was always that paradox of they'll pay the women of the night, but they don't want their daughters to be one and they don't want to marry one, right? That's the very hard puzzle piece for women to know, well, which route do you go? Which one gives you attention? Which one gives you money and status, right? It's fascinating to see the teeter-totter of it all. But she really wants to blame everything on white men. It's just quite crazy. What do you think? Let me know. I mean, it's pretty intense. So, wow. I don't know what to say. This is crazy, this woman. If you'd like to join my blog, it's www.subscribestar.com/MilahanArchive. Hope to see you there. Take care.